few years ago, I was extremely depressed. So depressed, in fact, that, I would let trash pile up in the house, bills would go unpaid, phone calls would go unanswered. I was pretty much a mess. And this was during COVID, so not only was I depressed, I was also feeling quite lonely because in the midst of the pandemic, it was quite difficult to go out and see people except through a screen. So I was feeling a bit isolated as well. One day I said to myself, should life be this way? It doesn't feel like life should be this hard, like I should be this depressed. But it was that way. One day I decided to try and cheer myself up a bit, so I went for a walk. And I walked about 30 minutes across town. And I have to be honest, the walk didn't really make me feel much better. The exercise and the fresh air was kind of nice, but I was still feeling pretty down. So after about 30 minutes, I turn around and I start walking back home. About 5 minutes into my walk back, somebody calls out to their porch, or from their porch to me. "Man, you look so sad. Do you need someone to talk to? Come up here, I'll hear you out." And I just stood there like a deer in headlights. I had no clue who this person was. I had never seen them before, never interacted with them before. And at first I thought, why is this stranger talking to me? I don't particularly relish talking to every single person I meet on the street, so I said, "No, thank you, that's a very kind offer, but I'll be okay." And as I start walking away, I hear him say, "Life's tough, isn't it? Some days I feel like crying too, and I get lonely too, and I try my best, but it doesn't seem good enough. And some days this whole world just feels exhausting. So from one tired person to another, would you keep me company here on my porch for 15 minutes? So I walk up to his porch and I sit down next to him and we get talking for 15 minutes. And then 30 minutes pass. And then an hour passes. And we have spent an hour just complaining about life to one another. But I have to say, it felt like afterwards, a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, and I could breathe again. Because finally, I was talking with someone who got what I was going through and how hard life could be. Of course, after an hour, I need to head home for dinner. So I stand up and I start walking away, and he says, "Would you like to come over for dinner next week? We can do this again." I said, I don't know. Let me think about it. And of course, the next week I was over at his house for dinner. Today, the disciples in this Bible story we heard are going through something remarkably similar, and Jesus does for them something remarkably similar to what that man on the porch did for me. So you have to imagine the context that the disciples are in here, what they went through the day before this story starts, because they're fishermen. And, most fishermen are fishing in the early morning or the evening, and that's when they'll catch their fish. But they were fishing all night, the story tells us. So that means they didn't catch any fish during the previous day, and they got so desperate to get fish to feed their families, to sell at the market, that they went fishing all night just trying to catch something. And then they see the sun rise on the next morning. They're still fishing. They still haven't caught anything. Can you imagine the defeat and guilt and anxiety they feel as they think, how am I going to feed my family? Things shouldn't be this tough, right? Life shouldn't be this hard. And then Jesus shows up. He walks over to them with a crowd behind him as they just have put their boats into shore. And he says, listen, I want to, tell this whole crowd about God, but it's kind of hard for them all to hear me. Can I use one of your boats and we put it out in the lake and they'll hear me better? Peter, who he asked, says, yeah, sure, okay. And they row out into the middle of the lake. And Peter must have been thinking the whole time, what's the point? Friends, if you felt like that at times, if life is too tiring, if things seem too hard, if things are too stressful, and you feel like you're juggling a million things and so most of them are falling down, then maybe you've thought, like me or Peter, that things aren't supposed to be this hard. Life isn't supposed to be this way. The human condition that we call sin describes how the world isn't as it's supposed to be. And that can refer to our individual actions, our choices, our beliefs and behaviors that aren't what God wants for us. But it can go even beyond that. Because the reality of sin is that this whole world is not as God intended it to be. God did not create us to be chewed up, broken down, and spitting out. God didn't create us to be overwhelmed by stress. God didn't create us to question whether our efforts matter, to wonder if we can be useful or helpful. God didn't create us to get lonely. God didn't create us to stay up all night crying or worrying about something. God didn't create us to suffer. Sin means that not just our choices or actions, but that the whole world that we live in has not gone the way that God wanted for us. So if, like me taking a walk, if, like Peter in that boat, you're wondering, why is it so hard? It's not supposed to be this way. Then you're right. It's not. But friends, I have good news. That's why Jesus has come, to save us, to bring us and this world back to how God wants it to be. And that's exactly what he's about to do for the disciples, for Peter and Andrew and James and John. Because after he finishes talking to the crowd on the boats, he tells Peter, okay, now row out your boat into the middle of the lake. You're going fishing again. And of course, Peter is defeated at this point. And he's wondering, what's the point? We're not going to catch any fish. We just spent the whole entire day and night fishing, Jesus. There's no point. I think that Jesus can almost see the look of worry and anxiety in his eyes. Maybe even the look of guilt in his eyes as he's questioning, am I a failure? How am I going to feed my family? Did I do something to mess up? So Jesus insists, no, go out and row into the middle of the water and throw your nets back in. So after Jesus insists that he does it, Peter says, fine, sure. They row out back into the middle of the lake. They cast out their nets. And suddenly they're full of fish, like immediately. It's almost mystifying how quickly it happened. They manage to finally get the nets back on board, and they get so much fish that their boats start to sink, and they have to quickly row back to shore. And then Peter says something interesting. Get away from me, Jesus. I'm a sinner. Seems like he's dealing with some guilt over, something he's done in his life. Seems like he's been carrying a burden of some wrong he's committed. But Jesus just looks at him and says, don't be afraid. I'm not going to attack you or turn you away. And then he says, come with me. I'll teach you how to fish for people. Follow me, and I'll show you what more I can offer you. Jesus is a lot like that guy I met on the porch while I was out walking. He gives the disciples what they need to feel loved, to feel seen, to feel like somebody understands their pain, to lift the weight off their shoulders and just breathe again. That's what Jesus does for them there. Friends, Jesus wants to do the same for you too. I mean, imagine if you were like me. You were having a bad day. You went out for a walk, and a stranger calls out to you from their front porch. Hey, you look like you're having a bad day. Come up, tell me about it. You don't know why, but for some reason, it feels like they would understand you, like they would get you, like if you tell them what was wrong, they would understand. So you go up to them on the porch and you start pouring out your heart. And in talking to them, you feel like your burdens are a bit lighter. And you can breathe again. That describes how Jesus begins to save us from sin, from this world not being the way God wants it to be. He calls out to us and says, come and join me on my front porch. Come and join me here and talk to me. Come, you who are weary, and sit with me. Come, you who are carrying heavy burdens,